Many of us spent the 90s in front of the TV. Endless afternoons jumping from one channel to another in search of our favorite shows. It might have something to do with the period, the way this medium was used, but I gave every TV program a chance. Most of the things I follow were cartoons, and boy oh boy, there really was everything. Even today there's still some ambiguity when it comes to animation. Erroneously it is still associated with children, even though it originated from cinema. It is still considered a genre, even if, as director Brett Bird has said many times, it is an art form, and as such, it can deal with any subject and therefore has the freedom to explore any genre. So to say that you love animation is rather vague. Does it mean that you appreciate it in any of its forms? Because not only do you find it on the silver screen, but also in the form of TV series, music videos, commercials, video games, not to mention everything that is produced on the web. Yeah, maybe it is generic, but what does it matter in the end? What must be recognized about animation is the ability to create new worlds from scratch and make even the most abstract ideas believable and real. Therefore, it is effective not only for what it represents, but also for what it communicates. But what is it that makes an animated product really good? Is it the aesthetic value that has the greatest impact on the audience? Or putting it on the same level as any work of entertainment, is it the creation of a solid narrative rather than the use of the technique that makes it good? Because when you think about it, it is the stories that get us excited and not the hyper-realism of the visual effects. Let's try to answer these questions by looking more carefully at TV series. What are the ingredients on which we should focus to create a successful one? Still, many creators would focus on its visual impact. And indeed, it's undeniable that the charm of some works comes from this aspect. But in a series, which often has hundreds of episodes that evolve and change over time, inevitably departing from its origins, what makes the difference? What if I say that it's possible to generate something of great impact even without conventional aesthetics? That there are cartoons that can reach excellent levels while neglecting visual presentation? It can happen, trust me. And to prove it, incidentally, I will try to tell a story. That are Trey Parker and Matt Stone and their creation, South Park. Like I said before, cartoons were not born as a product intended solely for children. From the 30s to the end of the 50s, the so-called Golden Age, animation was presented in theaters preceding feature films and the audience was mainly composed of adults. When the production cost of an animated short skyrocketed, demand for animation in theaters began to wane, and it found a place on the increasingly popular medium of television. Costs were reduced, as was the quality. Hanna-Barbera studios were among the pioneers of this new, simpler but still effective style. It was from this very moment that cartoons began to be branded as a product for kids. William Hanna and Joseph Barbera didn't like the label very much, as they were used to approaching a more diverse audience with Tom and Jerry. Eager to regain that more mature demographic, they proposed the first animated series broadcast in prime time, The Flintstones, a satire of the modern man set in prehistory, a humor close to that of the sitcoms broadcast in those years and with the frequent use of anachronistic visual gags that only a cartoon could get away with. The American television landscape has grown a lot since that time, creating a standard that has constantly evolved over the years. Comparing an episode of The Flintstones with any of today's cartoons, the differences are numerous. Narrative structure, themes, humor, fan service, characterization, and evolution of technique and style. Many years have passed, but how did these changes take place? Is it possible to identify a precise moment when this revolution took place? We can take a big step forward and go to the evening of December 17th, 1989, when a young network known as Fox broadcast the first episode of The Simpsons. The series, conceived by Matt Groening, in fact, reintroduces cartoons to primetime designed for a young audience, but also suitable for a mature one too. The Simpsons brought a breath of sweet cynicism, perhaps never seen before on TV. And if all this could hardly be found in a sitcom at the time, think about what it was like for cartoons. At the same time, all this involving a wider audience.
Hi, Columbo!
Bart's pranks attracted teenagers who proudly wore his t-shirts, creating some controversy. But at the same time, such a rebellious character was accompanied by a more sensitive one like Lisa. An adult could see himself in Homer, the first Homer, who feels the burden of responsibility, with a family counting on him, and who he would never want to disappoint. And on the other hand, Marge, a loving housewife, sometimes frustrated and struggling with a husband who makes her feel less loved, even finding herself at the point of questioning their relationship. And then there's Maggie, who in the first season never stops messing around with the fucking pacifier. Putting aside the refined humor and pungent satire, the empathy you feel for the Yellow family, even though it's a cartoon, was a fundamental element, and partly underestimated in the beginning. Yet, even Walt Disney was able to show that a drawing can be moving, which was actually one of his goals with Snow White, to be able to make people cry. Here the result is even more curious, because The Simpsons are presented with a more crude, bizarre, unrealistic design. Yet this didn't stop them from achieving global success. A surprise for everyone, including the writers, who work on it with shame, aware that no one would ever see it and that cancellation would be just around the corner.
Matt, nice meeting you. Good luck with your big cartoon show.
In the same period, probably with different intentions and influences, other series began to emerge with the desire to stand out, or perhaps making animation great again. To tell the truth, the 80s are remembered as a rather flat period, where the quality of cartoons was lower than the previous ones. The networks didn't seem interested in the artistic value, and new ideas weren't in demand. They just focused on profit. Well, cartoons at the time were aimed at children. And as John Kricfalusi has repeatedly pointed out, the only ones that were produced had to be associated with a brand or creation already known. Or better, they were just long commercials to accompany toys that would soon fill the shelves of stores. Fortunately, this sad chapter began to end when animation was cleverly chosen as the medium to give creative people a voice to produce original content. Just as Nickelodeon did with Doug, the Rugrats, and the Ren and Stimpy show. The latter was particularly important, as it was given credit for breaking the monotony that had reigned in past years, proposing grotesque humor and returning to an animation strongly inspired by the Golden Age. Elements that convinced MTV to carry on Beavis and Butthead, which stands out for its humor oriented to a more adult audience, but which also gave so much to SpongeBob SquarePants, as you can see from the use of the famous, very detailed, and sometimes disgusting close-ups. This was only the beginning, because there are many excellent shows from the 90s. Apart from the return to the origins, to the roots of what made this art so special, what was unprecedented and innovative was the abandonment of a certain goodism, or in any case the departure from the cheap morality that was constantly proposed on TV, and that had little basis in reality. The same reason why even a series like Seinfeld overturned the norm, abolishing those kisses and hugs, which became increasingly apparent that they were forced and existed only in the realm of television. The forerunner of this revolution was precisely The Simpsons. Not so much from an artistic side, perhaps, but in the sharp satire, ruthless humor, and animated characters who, more than those in Flash, are able to convey real emotions. But all this is not the result of a single mind, as is often believed. Of course, Matt Groening created the characters, which are still well known and can even be seen as far back as his first comic book creation, Life in Hell. but the input of directors, writers and producers James L. Brooks and Sam Simon is what gave substance to the show. Mike Reiss claims, Matt did the art, Sam made it smart, Jim gave it heart. In addition, the team of writers also boasted numerous Harvard graduates who were constantly working to make sure every script was perfect. It was written over and over again until the same line guaranteed a laugh even when heard over 20 times. Everyone gave their contribution, and the script was modified with input from everyone. It has been 30 years since the first episode of The Simpsons aired, and there is no doubt that the DNA of the Yellow family can be found in many forms in many successful series. The variety of characters featured in Scrubs were based on those of the town of Springfield. In addition to Scrubs, the family at the center of the sitcom Dinosaurs could potentially have a strong connection with them. In summary, there are those who were influenced by The Simpsons' humor, by its elements of the American sitcom, others by its style of drawing and animation, and there are also those who stole a little bit from it, only to later find their own identity. But among all these series, there is one that I haven't mentioned yet, although it represents the main point on which I intended to focus for the rest of the video, and that series is South Park. South Park is also a part of those shows from the 90s that somehow changed American television, but it's full of anomalies. Its story appears separate from the other cartoons. Visually, it doesn't represent a step forward, even if it has an immediately recognizable style. Its influences have nothing to do with the classic standards of animation, although they admit that without The Simpsons and Beavis and Butthead, they would hardly have been able to get on the air. And even its humor presents a step beyond everything that has been done up to that point, as well as the creators' questionable modus operandi, with which they still managed to achieve exceptional results. How did a show born using cheap vulgarity and childlike look last over 24 years, even standing out for its humor and originality? Many people still see South Park the way it was in its early days, with those badly drawn kids, intent on speaking the worst profanity, playing with shit, and provoking without ever looking anyone in the face. South Park can be offensive, it's true, but in order to be able to think, you have to risk being offensive. I imagine that many people ignore the skills of Trey Parker and Matt Stone. Their creation has gone through several stages and, like many beautiful things, 20 minutes are not necessarily enough to understand and appreciate it. And I say this also to women who don't want to go out with me. Give me a chance. Follow me on Instagram.
What would Blind Boy Connor do?
Randolph Severn Parker III, better known as Trey Parker, was born on October 19, 1969 in Conifer, Colorado. Already as a child, he showed a strong interest in cinema and music, deepening these passions by shooting amateur videos with friends and writing songs, all in the realm of comedy. After finishing high school, he attended the Berklee College of Music for only one semester, then moved to the University of Colorado in Boulder. It was there that during a film course, he met Matthew Richard Stone, better known as Matt Stone. They immediately bond. Both sharing a strong passion for Monty Python sketches, the two have little interest in the ideas of the rest of the class, intent of taking themselves too seriously and imitating the greats of cinema. Trey and Matt immediately began collaborating by making numerous short films, but the first significant breakthrough came with American History, a small animated short that, despite its simplicity and raw look, earned Parker a Student Academy Award. The choice to animate the cartoon using the cutout technique is clearly inspired by Terry Gilliam's surreal interludes in Monty Python Flying Circus. A second short entitled The Spirit of Christmas would be produced later. Once again, they used the same construction paper technique, maintaining an extremely clumsy and imprecise look. But for the first time, the foundations are planted for what will become South Park. Years will pass before anyone shows interest in the four foul-mouthed kids again. But the duo still remains productive, even going on to make their first feature film, Cannibal, the Musical. The film comes from a fake trailer inspired by the story of Alfred Parker, the first American to be tried for cannibalism in the 19th century. The video is popular among the film school students, and the enthusiasm convinces Parker and Stone to find the funds to make a feature film. Written, directed, co-produced and starring Parker himself, the film blends splatter, comedy and musical elements. After finishing the film, made with a budget of just $125,000 raised from family and friends, the two attempt to sell and distribute the film to finance new projects, but with little success. The film is eventually distributed in 1997 by the independent production company Troma, those responsible for Toxic Avenger, and goes on to become a cult film thanks to the popularity reached by South Park in 97. Almost the same destiny will happen to the second film, a project with a larger budget, but still an independent one, which was carried out with many difficulties. Although Trey and Matt seem to consistently produce moderately successful works, their beginnings are always remembered as unsuccessful. With no fixed occupation, no housing, hosted by friends and using dirty clothes as a mattress, the two moved to Los Angeles intent on making it big in Hollywood. But unfortunately, their ideas are not taken into consideration. During this period, in fact, their work is limited to projects on commission. A pilot for Fox, a commercial delegated to them by the Zucker brothers for Universal, and a greeting card. This last case, compared to the previous ones, marked the big change in the life of the two penniless filmmakers. In 1995, Fox executive Brian Graden paid Parker and Stone to create a Christmas card to send to his friends. The request is to have a new version of The Spirit of Christmas with a budget of just $1,000. This time the short is much more reminiscent of the South Park that everyone knows, obviously much rougher stylistically. This video, sent to about 80 people, starts circulating in the form of pirate videotapes and also lands on the web, becoming one of the first viral videos. This thanks also to... I'm not fucking with you. George Clooney.
Who else?
Who contributed to the spread of the video by sending it via email. All this attracted the attention of Comedy Central, a not too well-known cable channel at the time, which immediately asked the duo to develop a pilot inspired by the short. And so, on August 13, 1997, Cartman gets an anal probe. The first official episode of South Park is aired. A childish aesthetic that contrasts with the extremely vulgar language. This is the first impression we get from South Park. Although the animation and design look very simple, the process of creating a cut-out animation is time-consuming and laborious. The pilot, commissioned by Comedy Central, was entirely created by Parker and Stone, with a significant contribution from Eric Stau, still animation director of the series to this day. With a budget of $300,000, a massive amount of color construction paper was brought to make the backgrounds and characters, each with mouths in different sizes depending on the framing of the shot. Each setup was photographed frame by frame with a vertical camera. Made in a very small studio in Colorado during the summer, the 28-minute pilot episode took 3 months to complete. Comedy Central wasn't sure if they wanted to commission more episodes, considering that the first screening during the focus group didn't give the expected results. But after reading the script for the second episode and noting that the internet's response to The Spirit of Christmas was steadily growing, a season of 6 episodes was requested. From this moment on, no other episode is created using stop motion again. Instead, they start animating the show using the software Power Animator with the support of 31 processors. Although the software is mainly suitable for computer graphics and special effects, Parker and Stone opted for this choice in order to maintain the raw look of construction paper. The first episodes, in fact, will serve as a sort of training ground for the studio's 15 animators to understand how to get what the two authors requested, and episode after episode, you can already see improvements in textures and animation. The studio will continue to refine their technique over the years, but arguably the most significant change will come during the 5th season, where they will switch to Maya. From this moment on, the differences between the very first episodes and the most recent ones will be the most prominent. South Park Studios will grow to have 40 animators and 120 processors able to render 30 shots in an hour. Even an important film production such as South Park, bigger, longer and uncut, is outdated and primitive in the eyes of the authors, who at the time were satisfied with what they achieved in the feature film. With the current level of production value, the coarse elements of the beginnings are less evident, perhaps also due to the matter of habit, similar to getting accustomed to the yellow skin of the Simpsons. But it is fair to say that at the time, they had their own raison d'etre. The strength of South Park also lies in its simplicity. Those clumsy paperboard cutouts are another factor that makes it hilarious. Clearly, it is also this visual synthesis that allows us to laugh at an 8-year-old boy who is constantly brutally killed. I don't want to mention The Simpsons again, but not staying too far away from them, let's take Futurama as an example, as its production is pretty standard for animated TV series. After the executive producer assigns the various stories to several writers, the scripts are rewritten and tested for about 2 weeks. Then the actors record their parts of the dialogue, and storyboards are developed around them. If the story requires it, model packs are prepared for new characters and backgrounds. And so begins the long process of animation where, among the many stages, the most challenging parts are normally handed over to studios in South Korea. The process can last from 6 to 9 months per episode. Keep in mind that in the past, studios used to trace on paper, ink on celluloid sheets, and photograph each drawing. Nowadays, the process has been simplified thanks to digital techniques. The production of an episode of South Park is done very differently. The steps are roughly the same, but the processing time is extremely short. 6 days. Exactly. Not 6 months, 6 days. This fast-paced workflow gives the duo the possibility to make considerable changes up until the delivery of the episode ready to go to air, as happened in the case of Best Friends Forever, which focused on the case of Terry Schiavo and broadcast 12 hours before her death. Or the day after the results of the 2008 presidential election, when an episode was aired that focused entirely on Obama's victory, which, with an incorrect prediction, wouldn't have made much sense. But that didn't stop them from risking it again 4 years later with Obama's wins episode, and then again a third time with Hillary Clinton when she won. No, that time it didn't go so well. The timing and cost of doing something like this in other cartoons would be unthinkable. The approach is reminiscent of programs like Saturday Night Live, where every week you write a sketch inspired by the latest news. Reasonable for a live show, but in animation this is a rare and perhaps unique case. How many times did they happen to miss a deadline? Only once. And the missed delivery did not happen because of the popular writer's block. The record of 13 years was broken by an unpredictable blackout. Trey Parker admitted that it was a blessing, as chance would have it that the risk of not meeting the deadline due to lack of time was very likely anyway. This stressful method, witnessed in the documentary 6 Days to Her, is one of the main driving forces that also guarantees freshness and imagination to Parker and Stone. Knowing they have an upcoming deadline leads them to be more creative and forces them to work instinctively, abandoning all doubt and focusing on what made them laugh at the time. When you think about the creator of a television show, it is not always clear what their contribution is. Basically, they are the one who started everything, conceiving and presenting the general concept of the series. Maybe they build the foundations, writing a Bible, the official guide where all the most important aspects are included, who the characters are, where they live, and what stories are told. Oftentimes, the creator takes care of the pilot episode, writing the script, taking care of the direction and also the production. After these first steps, they become executive producer or showrunner who, among the other things, make sure that there is always a certain consistency in each episode of the show. It also happens that the creator contributes by giving voices to the characters. Mike Judge played Hank from King of the Hill for 13 years. Seth MacFarlane still takes care of 4 Family Guy characters. And the same goes for J.G. Quintel with regular show. On the other hand, Parker and Stone voice around 90% of South Park's characters. This choice was made for the sake of convenience, so that they always have their voice actors available. Their contribution is certainly fun and often varied, but it's a choice that also reflects their prejudice against actors, even if their real battle has always been against celebrities. In the early episodes, many people offered themselves for cameos. George Clooney gave the voice to Sparky, a nice homosexual dog who does nothing but bark like a common animal. The same thing happened to Jay Leno, who played a cat, while Jerry Seinfeld refused to play Turkey number 2.
No, thanks.
Besides voicing the various characters, Parker and Stone write, direct and produce every episode of their creature, and when necessary they compose the music too. It may not be a real anomaly for the first season of a series, but there are very few cases where the author continues to contribute so actively to their show. Eden Reed is one of these exceptions, since for 9 seasons of Archer, he wrote all the episodes, occasionally working with a partner. After the unexpected success of South Park between 97 and 98, many colleagues expected that, from the second season onwards, Trey and Matt's job would be to cash checks while a team of writers and directors would run the show for them. And it's not coincidence that the second season sees some new names popping up. However, this decision was made more because of the difficulties of producing the series and the feature film in the same year. Both will admit to being dissatisfied with that year's production, so much so that the DVD of the second season is the only one not to include any audio commentary. So much contempt stems in part from a self-analysis that leads them to wonder what they found funny at the time in certain gags. While on the other hand, they claim that both still love to work actively for South Park, and that only they know which direction to go in. They often compare themselves to a band, treating each season as an album, each episode as a song. The writing sessions, however, do not involve Trey and Matt alone. Meetings are organized in the writer's room where they discuss a topic and try to gather ideas. With those ideas, Trey Parker locks himself in his office and writes the script alone. Sorry. This is tiring, also because if you remember, all this is done within 6 days. You go back and forth from one room to the other, working scene by scene, but it's up to Parker to put everything in black and white, and the same goes for directing. Stone, who's also present in the writer's room, plays the role of producer. The Simpsons has been going for 33 seasons now, and over the years has seen the participation of more and more generations of writers and directors, and a different number of showrunners. This has resulted in a change over time, which in some ways may seem inevitable considering that you cannot stay in the 90s forever. Unfortunately, the point of view of the authors and writers who build the foundation has been totally lost. This seems different with South Park, where there have been changes, but they always reflect the spirit of one voice, thus being more coherent and faithful. Parker and Stone don't make many compromises. When they were proposed to make the South Park movie, they constantly fought against Paramount, who tried in every way to convince them to make a film with less vulgarity, in order to make it suitable for a younger audience, and therefore more profitable. Both opposed in their typical subversive way. When Paramount prepared the trailer to be shown before Austin Power, the duo contested the totally anti-South Park spirit used to promote the film,
We thought our movie was much cooler than that, and we didn't want it to be like, get ready, here it comes for the Wackalicious, and we're like, oh.
To prevent the trailer from being delivered, Matt Stone stole the only copy and loaded it into his car to take it home. But Paramount was far from happy.
3 biggest lawyers from Paramount just called me and said they're gonna sue us, and I was like, F them, let them sue us, because that was our, me and Trey were like, sue us right now, please, F you.
Other impositions concerned the numerous changes required by the MPA, the association that classified films in America, which found some scenes of the film too vulgar to be classified with an R. In retaliation, the two replaced the jokes in question with even more extreme things in order to make them angry, but were inexplicably approved. The same happened with the title of the movie. Initially it should have been South Park, All Hell Breaks Loose, but the word hell was too strong to appear in the title. So Stone and Parker suggested South Park, bigger, longer, and uncut, referring to the cinematic clip of the show, but also to the male member. Over time, however, their control freak obsessions have found a less capricious dimension. It's also curious to see how in recent years, they've also questioned their cynicism, wondering if it's now out of place, and if it has negatively influenced the audience by creating so many little Eric Cartmans. They have begun to wonder if their provocative nature is justified by a strong sense of humor that aims to make people laugh, or if that provocative nature is unjustified because it's closer to the destructive humor of an internet troll who behind the keyboard generates chaos and laughs at the misfortune of others without any empathy. Even their own humor has been questioned in a certain sense, almost labeled as outdated and stale. South Park has always put everyone to the test, without ever excluding anyone, coming to judge even themselves. And if you want a further confirmation of the self-analysis of the last episodes, just think that in season 22, they even apologized to Al Gore.
Oh, we're so sorry, Al Gore. Man, Bear Pig is real. I thought it was a hell of a statement by South Park, and I appreciated it a lot.
Since their origins, Mickey Mouse, Bugs Bunny, and Popeye appeared in theatrical shorts that played before the main feature, without necessarily going for a specific demographic. Some of the best-known animated adult productions of the past perhaps date only as far back as the 70s, and all in all they are true exceptions, like the feature films Fritz the Cat, or Down and Dirty Duck, and Heavy Metal. To be honest, some of the most famous Golden Age cartoons are now considered dated and unacceptable by today's standards. Think of Tom and Jerry, for example. Anyone would call it harmless entertainment, but the truth is that the violent situation unsuitable for children feature frequently in it, and most of all, it is especially rich in racist gags. An element that also Warner and Disney cartoons were not free from. They might have been appropriate back then, but now they are considered excessive and in bad taste. So much so that even by the 70s, the reruns of the shorts on TV were censored or modified. There are actually 11 cartoons by Looney Tunes and Merry Melodies known as the Censored 11, so full of racist stereotypes that they were never shown again. Nowadays there is no shortage of controversy, but more and more attention is being paid to the target audience. Let's say that it seems clearer which cartoons are intended for children. And there are even thematic channels for adults, such as Cartoon Network's night block called Adult Swim, which favors more mature, underground, and experimental content, like Aqua Teen Hunger Force, The Boondocks, Super Jail, Tom Goes to the Mayor, Robot Chicken, and Rick and Morty. These cartoons now enjoy more freedom, but it was very different in the 90s, when adult animated series were starting to pop up. Again, the Simpsons were pioneers in this as well, criticized and attacked many times in the past. Nowadays, it only occasionally happens, but in those years they were simply labeled as inappropriate, mainly because of Bart.
Cowabunga, dude!
But the whole family was often under fire too. Even Bush had something to say.
We are going to keep on trying to strengthen the American family, to make American families a lot more like the Waltons and a lot less like the Simpsons.
We know perfectly well how they fixed everything. But also think about Beavis and Butthead. There was a lot of controversy around scenes of animal cruelty and dangerous behavior. So much so that the episodes were never heard again. The most famous case is undoubtedly the one related to the news story at the time, in which a child set fire to his house, killing his 2-year-old younger sister.
Beavis and Butthead are cartoon characters on MTV, but their humor is being blamed for a family tragedy.
The child's mother blamed the show by claiming that the child was emulating the behavior of one of the main characters, Beavis, who obsessively repeated the word fire. Fire! 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 MTV decided to remove the word from all episodes aired until that point, and strictly forbid it from future episodes. Even John Kay had quite a few problems with Ren and Stimpy. The children were crazy about disgusting gags with boogers, saliva, and earwax. But the violence was too much for a cartoon on Nickelodeon. Not to mention Ren's gruesome neuroses. After 2 seasons, Chris Felucci was kicked off of his own show, where he was not only its creator, but also producer, writer, director, and voice actor for Ren. The friction with the network was also related to production. The deadlines were never met, and the delays were scandalous. However, it was the excessively violent and graphically disturbing sequences of The Man's Best Friend episode that convinced Nickelodeon to get rid of him and continue the series without his contribution. The episode was never aired. Except 10 years later, as part of Ren and Stimpy Adult Party Cartoon, a new, more extreme version aired on Spike. Also cancelled due to delays and inappropriate scenes. We have seen cases where controversy and censorship was an almost unexpected consequence. When you find yourself making challenging political, religious and social reflections, there will always be someone who will oppose it because they think differently, or because they have no sense of humor. Tackling the topics of freedom of speech and the right of satire is even more thorny with South Park, because Trey and Matt took the field as provocateurs. The language was the very first shocking element of the 4 foul-mouthed kids in the series. The authors themselves will admit that with the first episode they focused a lot on this, thinking they had to bring obscenities to the end, thus surpassing the spirit of Christmas.
You know what you like? You like to Hey, Wendy, what's up?
But the duo soon stopped making fun of taboo topics only, and focused more on desecrating stories with a moral. Stone and Parker's beginnings could be described as very fortunate. Considering the many gaps in the storytelling of the first episodes, working on the South Park movie was like a school for them, during which they developed the right tools to tell a story. Due to the fact that the show had already gained a reputation as a shocking and vulgar program since its first airing, it was almost natural to be delving even deeper into topics that no one else would ever want to deal with. And indeed, it's hard for anyone to narrate the desperation of a son who doesn't feel loved by his father because he never molested him, or the miracle of the statue of Mary bleeding out of her ass. No one would do that. Well, maybe Lars von Trier. But on TV, only Trey and Matt have dared so much. So much so that with their name as provocateurs, in front of the most absurd episodes, people will say, well, it's just South Park. You can imagine then what will have been the most controversial moments in the history of this show. On November 16, 2005, Trapped in the Closet aired, which not only ridiculed actor Tom Cruise and created the case now known as Closetgate, but also attacked the untouchable charge of Scientology. To fully understand the level of danger such a theme could generate, think Penn Jillette from comedy magician duo Penn and Teller and host of the show Bullshit also proposed to Showtime to discuss it in his anti-fraud whistleblowing program, but he was forbidden to do so to prevent the network from having legal problems with Scientology. Parker and Stone, who firmly believe in freedom of speech and that it's okay to joke about everything because no one should be exempt from this treatment, convinced themselves that they would be finally the ones to talk about it. As a result, Viacom forced Comedy Central not to re-air the episode. as it would have been harmful to the upcoming release of Mission Impossible 3. The removal of the episode unleashed the wrath of the internet, who in response uploaded it to more than one platform so that everyone could see it. Even Parker and Stone, during a live event in London, screened the episode, and then distributed free copies to everyone present. Given Tom Cruise and Scientology's well-known predisposition for legal action, Trey and Matt prepared themselves well.
You are so sued, kid!
Well, go on then, sue me!
A month later, Comedy Central began airing the episode again, but South Park saw the beloved character Chef, voiced by Isaac Hayes, disappear. The singer was on the show from the very first episode and never opposed the content of the cartoon. But as a Scientologist, he asked Parker and Stone not to make the episode, then not to air it, and finally, in 2006, abandoned them for good. Even today, the reasons for this departure are not fully clear, but a recent statement by Isaac's son suggests that these decisions were not made by his father, but by Scientology. This is very likely considering that the church had no trouble investigating Trey and Matt's private lives in an attempt to obstruct them. All in all, the whole thing was priceless publicity for South Park, so much so that it secured them a Peabody Award, rewarding their willingness to criticize and fight injustice. They also entered the episode at the Emmy Awards as a sign of provocation against Comedy Central and, to their surprise, got the nomination. The award was won by The Simpsons, whose creators commented on the event saying, "I guess that's what happens when you don't mock Scientology." The riskiest satirical topic to deal with today is undoubtedly that of Islam and religious fundamentalism. In 2001, Super Best Friend aired, and alongside Jesus, Buddha, and the other key religious figures, the Prophet Muhammad also appeared. But this didn't cause any problems. After the events involving Lars Vilks and the Julen Posten, however, the episode was removed from both Comedy Central programming and the official South Park website. Parker and Stone certainly wanted to express their opinion with the intention of showing the Prophet once again, but this time focusing the whole story on his appearance. Therefore, in 2006, Cartoon Wars was aired, an episode divided into two parts where the theme of censorship is once again the protagonist. The idea of showing the Prophet was however aborted at the request of Comedy Central, fearing a possible terrorist attack after the airing of the episode. Instead, they opted for a black screen and a sober white text. The episode was appreciated by critics, not only for having dealt with such an uncomfortable and topical subject, but also for making fun of Family Guy, a well-known Fox cartoon famous for its casual and provocative comedy. The Simpsons studios sent flowers to South Park Studios as a token of thanks, while the staff of King of the Hill left a message: "You are doing God's work." After 5 years, to celebrate the 200th episode of South Park, Parker and Stone designed an episode that would combine several elements of the previous 13th season, thus creating a single story. In this mashup, they decided to aim high, making fun of Tom Cruise again and proposing a possible appearance of the Prophet. 200, this is the title of the episode, plays hilariously on the idea of representing the Prophet. The citizens of South Park draw him like a generic stickman on a sheet of paper, talk to him while he's locked in a van, and carry him around in a mascot costume. 200 will be followed by 201, thus closing the story. During the airing, however, something doesn't add up. It's impossible to hear the word Muhammad because every time it is pronounced, it is bleeped.
I'm sorry, but will you please step out of the bear costume?
During the epilogue, the characters are all reunited, ready to pronounce the moral, which obviously reflects the opinion of their creators. As usual, it is anticipated by, "I learned something today." But this time, a very long beep silences the characters.
You see, I learned something today.
Don't you see, Gingers? That's right, friends.
Yeah.
At first it was immediately thought that the censorship itself was a gag, perfectly in line with the spirit of the show, but instead it was the result of a tampering by Comedy Central, which preferred to broadcast the incomplete episode, fearing once again an attack by terrorists. This fear was not completely unfounded, considering that after the airing of 200, the radical organization Revolution Muslim published on its website a clear warning addressed to Parker and Stone. You will end up like Theo Van Gogh continuing to broadcast this show, followed by a link with location information of the two authors' houses.
A threat against the creators of South Park, a warning by a radical Islamic group right here in America, right here in New York, that they will end up dead because of a cartoon.
Despite the threats, Trey and Matt gave Comedy Central the show they wanted to do, only to find it altered without any warning. Their response was soon found on their official website. In the 14 years we've been doing South Park, we have never done a show that we couldn't stand behind. We delivered our version of the show to Comedy Central and they made a determination to alter the episode. It wasn't some meta joke on our part. Comedy Central added the bleeps. In fact, Kyle's customary final speech was about intimidation and fear. He didn't mention Muhammad at all, but he got bleeped too. We'll be back next week with a whole new show about something completely different, and we'll see what happens to it. Many critics accuse Comedy Central of granting a significant victory to Islamic extremism, thus encouraging other threats from fundamentalist groups. To give them credit, the network defended itself, arguing that, despite their support for freedom of expression and creativity, the safety of their employees could not be put at risk and precautions had to be taken. The intervention of journalists, critics, and colleagues from the world of satire were numerous. Seth MacFarlane, creator of Family Guy, during an interview commented,
the question becomes, is this worth getting shot? Is it the funniest joke anyone's ever written?
I mean, I think you cheapen Matt and Trey's morality, strength, and courage when you say, is the joke worth it? Because the question is, what is morally right?
While the crew of The Simpsons took advantage of Bart's blackboard gag to send their support. It's clear that their peers in animation, despite the good intentions, are not willing to cross certain limits, unlike the duo. Other animated shows have emphasized the importance of freedom of speech and have exhibited and fought to express their ideas, even for less noble reasons, but certainly not less important. Taking risks is not fundamental to make satirical humor, but it's what makes it effective.
Comedy should provoke! It should blast through prejudices, challenge preconceptions. Comedy should always leave you different than when it found you. Sure, humor can hurt, even alienate, but the risk is better than the alternative. Demand to be challenged, to be offended, to be treated like thinking, reasoning adults. Don't let a comedian, a network, a congressional committee, or an evil genius take away your freedom to laugh at whatever you want.
The most curious feature of Trey Parker and Matt Stone's path is their gradual climb to gaining a following and critical success. South Park seemed to be a passing fad, ready to deflate at any moment. They were aware of that, so much so that during the making of the first 6 episodes, they agreed to play in David Zucker's comedy Basketball, a film that still causes them disgust and shame today, but which allowed them to observe a director at work and learn a lot about how to run a Hollywood production. Even after the success of South Park, they continued to accept a wide variety of jobs because the assumption was that after 2 years they would return home to Colorado, ready to go back to a simpler life. When they made the album Shefade, it was only so they could meet some of their idols in the music world, and also to finally have the chance to realize their little failed rock band dream. The film instead was supposed to be their swan song. They wanted to leave the scene with something even more gross and extreme. Make their mark and leave the scene with one last fuck you to Hollywood. Oh, and then he also had to be a musical.
What would Prime Boy Tano do if he was here right now? He'd make a plan and he'd follow through. That's what Prime Boy Tano do.
Despite the impulsive and inexperienced approach, the bubble didn't burst. And it's not only by looking at the cartoon that you can see a growth. In 2001, That's My Bush, a sitcom starring the then President of the United States, George W. Bush. In 2004, a film inspired by American action movies, but entirely made with puppets. Team America World Police. In 2011, they got in touch with Robert Lopez, creator of Avenue Q, and together they wrote a musical about Mormons, The Book of Mormon. Broadway has always been Parker's dream, and when after 7 years of work he finally managed to reach his goal, it was an unexpected success.
I believe that Satan has a hold of you.
The musical was immediately called a classic and even led them to win 9 Tony Awards. This last achievement may prove that South Park's success most likely wasn't an accident. But it's still amazing to think how 2 losers who used to crash Hollywood parties to fart on celebrities have now managed to conquer even Broadway. So let me wipe my mouth for a second after sucking off Parker and Stone to get the facts straight. Even at first, well, I have to spill the beans. All these questions about what animation is, how to create a successful series. What the fuck do I know, right? Actually, this is just a pretext to share with you the story of one of the most influential cartoons of the last 20 years, and to tell it I wanted to do it in my own way, making a general reflection on the medium itself. I also want it to be a small provocation, especially for those who, when it comes to animation, think of nothing but Disney. The beauty and grandeur that we find in perfect poses, precise anatomy and fluid movements can still be found in something simpler and more imprecise.
I am a banana!
Just like in music, there is little point in reducing everything to one genre. Having said that, I don't want to leave you with blue balls. I want to try to come to a conclusion and understand what the story of Trey and Matt tells us. If we point out the ingredients that have allowed this series to stand out and last a significant amount of time. Let's start with the design. South Park's stylistic choice may be poor, but it's recognizable and undeniably it's this simplicity that allows the duo to focus more on ideas than on technical aspects, thus allowing them to communicate those ideas almost instantly, which, as should be clear by now, isn't easy with animation. To quote Big Doctor, animation is like telling a joke and waiting 3 years to see if anyone laughed. But it doesn't mean that you have to be content with low quality in order to produce quickly and in large quantities, unless you're a YouTuber. Let's think for example of some works by Genndy Tartakovsky. Despite the minimalist choices adopted in Samurai Jack, both from a visual and narrative point of view, such as the total absence of dialogue, it is undeniable that the result has a great impact, confirming the rule that less is more. And here we connect to the other essential aspect of any narrative work, and not only animated. In this regard, we will now mention another Pixar director, John Lasseter. He said, "Never in the history of cinema has a movie been entertaining to the audience because of the technology. It is what you do with the technology. It's what you do with the medium. That's so special." And so here's another point in favor of South Park. It's not having refined the drawings or animation that makes them relevant, but the script. They use tools to keep the structure of an episode at bay. They do research. They wonder what the message of the episode is, what a character feels, whose point of view it is. Maximum attention to detail. The other point is consistency. The spirit with which they started is unchanged. Of course, I've already pointed out that in 20 years there has been growth, and every year the show becomes more pungent and reaches unexplored areas. They always feel a need to surpass themselves and not to repeat things. Sometimes they have changed their mind about something, but everything always comes from the same voice. Mom and Dad are always there. And to be as consistent as possible, you need to have total control, which may seem excessive because, after all, TV, like cinema, is a team effort. Advertising sometimes makes us believe that it's all the result of a unique genius, of the great visionary director who knows how to get it done. The public needs heroes. Yes, there are cases in which an artist manages to handle more aspects of a work, and the greatest benefit is that despite its flaws and imperfections, it becomes closer to the author's vision and perhaps seems more honest. And when you think about it, how many series have started to lose steam once the creator has abandoned them? It might be excessive for one person to cover so many roles and control as much as possible, but the interest and devotion of a fan can only grow when an artist contributes so much to their work. South Park's strong authorial voice is extremely effective, and it's appreciated that behind every single episode there's always their hand. Quite a rarity in long-lived series. Despite the many fuck yous, Trey and Matt pay a lot of attention to their audience. They never want to disappoint their fans. Just think that Trey Parker, after undergoing a cholecystectomy operation, left the hospital for one day during his recovery in order to record dialogue for the video game The Fractured But All. This attention and devotion maybe comes from the fact that they too, first of all, have always been spectators, and they put themselves in the shoes of a fan. They are the ones who ask themselves what they would like to see and what makes them laugh. We know that their modus operandi should not be replicated, but I find that their free and personal way of producing entertainment is the one that generates something original. Like the really non-mainstream choice to call a band like Primus to make the cartoon theme song.
We kind of have a show, you know, we need a theme song. It's like, we need someone to do a theme, let's call Primus.
It's not a good idea to challenge the network, insult everyone, ignore television rules, work with tight schedules, and talk about controversial topics just because it's funny. Yet being rebellious has rewarded them, because after all they have done nothing but take risks in the name of their ideas. They were honest with the show, with the fans, and among themselves. Because if there's one element of their story that strikes me most, it's that behind South Park there's a great friendship that has been going on for many years. Hey, thank you all for watching my video. If you enjoyed it and you wanna support me, you can leave a like, write a comment, and subscribe to the channel. Or even better, buy me a coffee. Do you wanna know how? Check out the comment section. Ciao a tutti e grazie.